We're now on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis, and Rava says Bibola Hem Derech Akalaton. Here's a case where the Balabayas might come back suddenly, and they're afraid of that, through a shortcut, meaning he'll take it around in such a way that all of a sudden he comes back, and therefore the Amoritz is inhibited, afraid that he might get caught, and he doesn't even invite his friend to be mitame. Nui hochi seifanami, so why in the safe to say it's tame? If the balabayas might show up unexpectedly by taking a shortcut, then that should inhibit the Amoritz. And the Gemara says, "Kevet the Amar lehu lahem lechu bani b'achrechem somcha datay." The difference between the seif and the reisha is that in the seif it's tummy because he said to them, "You go ahead, continue on the journey. Don't stop and wait for me. I'm following in your footsteps." And in such a case, they feel that if they don't see him behind him, then they could be lax about the taros. Okay. Haminiach ovikolchom b'chanusa haminiach yeno bekaro b'seifa tzricha. Why does the Mishnah give me all these different scenarios and repeat over and over again the two approaches, the two opinions, that of the Rabbanan and Rav Shimon Gamliel, who's Mekil? The itara ovid kolchavim. In the first case, which is not the case of the store, but the case of the transportation of the wine, so now the idolater is participating in the transportation of the wine, this savar dilma asi v'chazile. Maybe the reason why we could be makil and allow relying on supervision is because the guy is always thinking any minute the Jew might show up. Suddenly, without any announcement, he'll catch me. Aval bekarno b'svina. But if the wine is located together with the idolater on a boat or on some sort of a wagon, the guy says to himself, maybe the Jew left the boat and he's far away. He's not going to show up on the boat immediately. And therefore, the guy feels carte blanche. You know, he can do as he pleases. No one's going to inhibit him. But if we would have had the kula of the supervision in the case of the wagon or the boat, I would have thought that here the Rabbanan will rely on the chazaka to be matir the yayin mishum desavar dilma asi bi orchachrini v'kaya guda v'chazili. Maybe although we docked the ship at point X on the seashore, this Jew might show up at point Y and he has a vantage point and he can see me from where he docked or where he stopped. But in the case where the guy is working in a store, a wine store of a Jew, and the Jew left the store, maybe we should asa the wine lechumra in that case, because you know what? The idolater could lock the door. The oven called the boy, and then he feels he could do whatever he wants, and the Jew will never know about it. Kamash Malan, we say that the wine is mutter in all these three cases, and we're not choshesh that the guy is oblivious and impervious to supervision, but rather he's becheskas heter. Now we had a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rav Shimon Gamliel regarding how much time, if the Jew is not available, is enough time for the guy to switch and put his hands into the barrel. So we had the chumrah of the Rabbanon. It's just a short amount of time, a limited amount of time that takes the idol worshiper to bore a hole in the lid of the barrel, patch up the hole, and the patch dries up. Rav Shimon Gamliel, on the other hand, is more makil, and he says, no. That's not what the idol worshiper is going to do. He's too afraid that it won't dry up and it'll be obvious that he fooled around here. Therefore, we have to give him a lot more time to allow the guy to remove the entire lid and find a new lid and to do a magef on that lid and it'll dry. Amar Rab Bar Chana Amar Rab Yochanan. Machlokes b'shal sid. Rabbi Yochanan claims that the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rishon Gamliel only applies to sid. Sid is plaster, a major word in Masechta Bava Basra. Now, there are two ways of doing magefa, of solidifying the lid on the top of the barrel. One is called plaster, and the other is called concrete. Aval b'shal tit divrei hakol kedei sheyiftach v'yaguf v'yigof. If the lid of the barrel that contains the wine is connected, or shall we say cemented to the top, to the barrel itself with cement, then even Reb Shimon Gamliel will admit that he can get away with it. And therefore, in a shorter period of time, the wine becomes us. We have to worry about the fact, even according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, that the idol worshiper may have pulled off in a very short amount of time the the opening of the barrel, etc., etc. He says the following: plaster is always white. If the lid is made of plaster and it's punctured and a plaster patch is applied to cover the hole, that patch, as soon as it dries, will be indistinguishable from the rest of the lid. The entire lid is white. So even in that place where he punctured the lid and he plastered it up, it's white with white. And therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, we understand, according to the Rabbanan, that just give him enough time, the guy alone, to puncture and patch the hole in such a lid, and the wine, therefore, is forbidden. We'll never know, and he'll get away with it. But in clay, what happens is, what clay is dark in color. It's not white. It lightens after 2 days of drying. So in the case of clay, the Rabbana would agree that we're not concerned about puncturing. The idol worshiper would be afraid that the patch would be distinguishable from the rest of the lid for a number of days. Therefore, the wine will be forbidden only, and here we have the kula of Rav Shimon Gamliel, but the Rabbanan agree, concede in the case of clay, that only if enough time elapsed for the idol worshiper to remove the entire lid and apply a new one, like Rav Shimon Gamliel says, only then is it us. Meisvei. Whereas a kasha now, Rabbi Yochanan from a brisa. On Rav Shimon Gamliel Chachamim, Rav Shimon Gamliel argued against the Chacham. Hello, situmo nikar bein lemala ubein lemata. You're saying, Chachamim, that the idol worshiper feels very comfortable about puncturing the lid and patching it up. Says Rab Shimon Gamliel, I don't get it. Whether you look at the top of the lid or even the inside of the lid, it's always going to be distinguishable, and you could expose the idol worshiper's deed. From on top, the patch will look newer compared to the rest of the lid. From underneath, the patch will be detectable by its texture. So the Gemara asks the following kasha. If not for Rabbi Yochanan, we would understand. Then the machlokes between Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel revolves around the case of a lid that's made of clay. Hainu dikatani situmo nikar bein lamala bein lamata. That's what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel argued against the Chachamim, that he would never try to get away with this because the patch that he puts on the cover is always distinguishable, whether you look above or below. But if we reject Rabbi Yochanan, we say that the machlokas is in the case of a lid of plaster, is then bishlei melamata yedia elamala holo yedia. In other words, on top it's going to dry, and the plaster is white on a white lid, and it's not distinguishable. Lamata yedia. If you would turn the lid upside down and look on the inner side underneath, then you would see the difference between the plaster and the rest of the lid. So that's the kind of twilight zone about which is the machlokas between Rav Shimon Gamliel and the Rabbana. So Gemara says, no. Rav Shimon Gamliel, hu delo yada mai kami Rabbanon. Rav Shimon Gamliel never understood what the Rabbana were talking about. Hachi kamer lahu. And therefore, his argument against them, he says, Ibishal tit, mimanashal. Ibishal tit, kamrisu, if you're saying that there's a lid that's made of clay, situ manika bein lamala bein lamata. He's not going to try to get away with this because the patch is recognizable both above and underneath. The Ibishal sid kamrit. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying that according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's argument against the Chachamim, even if you are talking about a lid of plaster, Nehi Dilamal Yadi could get away with it on top because it's white plaster as a patch added to a white lid. But Lamata Mir Yadia. But if the Jew will flip over the lid and see the underneath side of the lid, he'll be able to tell, even in the case of plaster, that somebody tampered with the lid and then put a patch and closed it up. And therefore, the guy would never try to do such a thing. So you got to give him more time to completely remove the lid, says Reb Shimon Gamliel, and replace it with a new lid. For Rabbanan hold, came into Lamal lo yedil, Masika died to the apir for chazile. Now, the way I understood this, apparently that's not the way he understood. Anyway, the guy doesn't entertain the possibility that the Jew is going to catch him by turning the lid upside down and inspecting the underneath part of the lid. Inami, zimnin dechalev. Sometimes the patch melds uniformly with the rest of the lid so that it's indistinguishable even from underneath, and therefore the Rabbanan Amach. Omar Rav Haloch Reb Shimon Gamliel hold Tanan stomach avose. I have a stam Mishnah that supports Rabbi Yochanan. That supports Reb Shimon Gamliel. This now we learned in our Mishnah. Olchel al shulchan imo. The idol worship and the Jew are eating at the same table. V'niach, and they put lug in a flask of wine ala shulchan, or lug in ala duvliki, or they left wine in the cupboard. V'nicha v'yatza. And the Jew left and stepped outside. That which is on the table, the guy felt that he has carte blanche because the Jew left him there on the table with the wine. That which is in the cupboard, we could be matir and assume that the guy would not have the chutzpah to open the cupboard and take out the flask of wine for the cupboard. V'im amalo heavy mizog v'shoseh, but he said to him, I'm leaving now. You pour, and you drink. Is afshal aduvki aser? He implied to the guy that he has carte blanche free movement over anything he wants. Like you have a guest, staying in your apartment. You say to him, if you have anything you find there, you can take and enjoy. The mustard, the ketchup, whatever else I left there. Chavios, psuchos, asuros, stuvos, mutaros. Kadesh yiftach v'yagur for tigov. Now, what is Rava teaching me here? Rava is teaching me that what is the time period within which we have to be afraid that the idol worshiper will tamper with the barrel of wine? Is Kadeshi Yiftach v'Yoguf v'Tigov. So the word v'Yoguf here is very, very critical. So Yiftach means that he breaks open the cover of the barrel. Yoguf means he replaces the cover of the barrel with a new cover, which he plasters down or cements down to the barrel, and that's going to take a long time. The Mishnah completely omits the Shita of the Chachamim, is therefore halacha kistam Mishnah. Shita, why did Rav have to tell me that? Maybe this Mishnah is just expressing the view of Rav Shimon Gamliel, but it's not a stam Mishnah. Is therefore Kamashmal Rava says that this is considered a stam Mishnah we paskelite. Now, at this point, there's a very interesting sort of change in the flow of the sugya, and the Gemara wants to know about contemporary practice. Contemporary meaning at the time of the Gemara. The Gemara says that if we combine two shitos, that of Rav Shimon Gamliel here in our Mishnah, and that of Rabbi Eliezer that we had earlier, back on Daf Lamed Aleph, then the combination of the two would allow us to deposit wine, if it's sealed, in the hands of the idol worshippers, and yet we're machmir not to do so. Gemara says, Shimon Gamliel is not afraid that the idol worshiper might puncture a hole in the lid of the barrel and think that he can get away with it. He's not going to do that. He's going to do a more long-winded, extended process. Right, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that if you seal the flask, we're not afraid of ziyuf, that he's going to break the seal. Is therefore frekta Gemara ha'idna my taima lo mosvinon chamra biyad of the gechavim. Why is it nowadays we're so careful not to deposit wine in the hands of the idol worshippers? Why don't we just put a seal on the barrel, and even if we're not there in the next day or so, but we'll be there within the next 3 days, so we can rely and fall back on Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And not only that, we have Rabbi Eliezer to rely on, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're not afraid that it'll break the seal. And the Gemara answers Mishum Shaycha. So what's Shaycha? A very small hole would often be left in the lids of wine barrels. This is like what they call airing out wine. Do you know what I mean? Like if you get a bottle of wine, I'm talking about dry wine. What they often do is, after they open the dry wine, they let the air come in. You know what I mean? Or even after they pour it into a cup, they shake it around, more and more air. So therefore, they put a small hole in the lid of the wine. The lid of the wine barrel, I should say, to allow the gases that are produced by the fermentation process to escape, air it out, so the barrel would not burst. Okay, it also has to do with the taste of the wine. We are concerned that the idol worshiper might force a straw through that hole, sample some of the wine. And therefore, we don't want to leave our sealed barrels of wine in the hands of the idolaters. Omar Rava. Okay, this starts a new sugya about the Yetzer Hara. And it's interesting because the Gemara assumes that the Yetzer Hara for different averos works in relatively different ways. We'll just start the sugya and turn to the beginning of daf ayin. Zona overes kol chav Yisrael misubin etzlo. So Jews are eating together in a meal together with a non-Jewish harlot. And the Jew has wine on the table. So Rava says, Chamra Shari. We don't suspect that she, the non-Jewish harlot, the idolatrous harlot, would have put her hands inside the wine. Why? Nehida Tokif Yisra de Avera. We certainly have to be afraid of the fact that these Jewish men, unfortunately, are going to have an intimate relationship with this non-Jewish idolatrous harlot, because the Yetzer Hara is very, very powerful here. But, says the Gemara Daf Ayin, Yitzra de'ayin nesech lo tokifle. We're not afraid that these sinners will also be tempted to perform any sort of idolatry act or libation with this wine. However, Zona Yisraelis Velvedes Kochav Mesubin, if who's sitting at the table, a Jewish harlot, together with idolaters, Chamra Osu, my time ahol v'zila alayu, vasrayu grira. Now, the way that Rashi interprets this sugya is she's on a very low social status here. I mean, the Akum consider her a low-life harlot. So she's cheap in their eyes. Now, if they start tampering with the wine and they want to use it to pour the wine as a libation, she's not going to say anything. Her status is such that they look at her as such a cheap whatever, that she's not going to object if they go ahead and they take her wine and pour it as an idolatrous libation. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop for today. And no, I think that since